Why we provide different internet solutions for your different needs. SLT Fiber, 4G and ADSL. SLT Broadband, just the way you want it.
Tonight, Price of Peace. 2 Sri Lankan army personnel of the peacekeeping mission in Mali perish in a rebel attack. Reported U-turn. Media reports say that the arrest warrant issued for Brigadier Priyanka Fernando by a UK court might be withdrawn. Unending struggle for power. TNA MP R. Sambandan once more stakes his claim to the opposition leadership.
You will thus observe that there is a clear and definite conflict of interest between the duties and functions.
Partial victory. Plantation owners agreed to increase the minimum daily wage of plantation workers to 700 rupees. All this and more this Friday, the 25th of January 2019.
From other Derana.
Smart Android තාක්ෂණයෙන් එන සිංග විස්ටා TV එකක් මිලදී ගන්නා ඔබට හිත පිරෙන්න වාසි රැසක් ඕනෑම සිංග ප්‍රදර්ශනාගාරයකින්.
This is Other Derana First at 9 with Ndivari Amawata and Mahesh Jani. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and a warm welcome. Good evening, Mahesh.
Good evening, Indivari.
Right, we've been talking about a lot of developing stories yesterday, and I think those developments are to be reported today too, especially with the president in Singapore. I think was able to raise the Sri Lankan side's concerns over the Singapore-Sri Lanka free trade agreement.
Indeed,
during the meeting with the head of state there.
Indeed, that's one of the things that he said he will do as soon as he meets the Singaporean Prime Minister, and that's exactly what happened today. But tonight we have to start with some tragic stories. A captain and a corporal of the Sri Lanka army were killed by an improvised explosive device during the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali today. 3 other Sri Lankan soldiers have sustained injuries during the attack launched by a rebel group.
Now, issuing a media statement, the Sri Lanka army said that the UN peacekeeping mission headquarters in Mali is conducting investigations into this incident.
An armed vehicle called WMZ carrying Sri Lankan peacekeeping troops on patrol in Douentza in West Africa's Mali came under a remote-controlled improvised explosive device by a rebel group attack around 6:30 this morning in Mali time. Sri Lanka army confirmed that the attack on the WMZ and the convoy, which was returning after a mission, killed 1 Sri Lankan army captain and another Sri Lankan army trooper who were on board. Captain HWD Jayavikrama of 11th Sri Lanka Light Infantry from Polonnaruwa and Corporal SS Vijay Kumara of 1st Mechanized Infantry Regiment from Talakolavawa of Pulpitigama in the Sri Lankan Army contingent in Mali are the deceased. Reports further say that those who sustained injuries in the same IED attack were airlifted for treatment to the Level 2 hospital at Gao, the commercial city on the banks of River Niger. It is also reported that clearing operations were still on and that the attack caused damages to the ill-fated WMC vehicle and another that followed behind. UN peacekeeping mission headquarters in Mali is conducting investigations into the incident. From 1948 to the 31st of December last year, 679 Sri Lankan peacekeeping officers have contributed in conflict areas around the world, and 8 deaths of Sri Lankan military personnel occurring across all peacekeeping missions during that period.
Well, we recently brought to you a development concerning Sri Lanka's Minister Councillor of Defence, who was earlier attached to the Sri Lanka High Commission in London, Brigadier Priyanka Fernando. It was reported then that the Brigadier was found guilty over gesturing towards a group of protesting LTTE sympathisers outside the Sri Lanka High Commission in London.
Now, in its latest development, local media reports emerged today, which highlighted a discussion between officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the British High Commissioner James Dorius. They say that the warrant issued for the Brigadier's arrest will be subjected to a review.
News broke last Tuesday that the then Minister Council of Defence attached to the Sri Lankan High Commission in London, Brigadier Priyanka Fernando, was found guilty of making certain gestures towards a group of LTTE sympathisers on 4th of February, the day of Sri Lanka's independence last year. The Brigadier was found guilty of 2 out of 3 offences under Public Order Act by signalling a death threat to the protesters. Media reports further said that the Westminster Magistrates Court issued an arrest warrant on Brigadier Priyanka Fernando, ruling that his actions were threatening, caused harassment and that he intended them to be so. Furthermore, it was also reported that following this judgment, an international arrest warrant is likely to be issued for Sri Lanka's ex-defence attaché, and that if the Sri Lankan government refuses to cooperate, its High Commissioner in London will be summoned to appear before court. It is in this backdrop that certain local media outlets today reported that high-level officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs met with the British High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, James Towris, to discuss the matter yesterday. Quoting the Foreign Ministry, the reports say that the British High Commissioner had assured he would promptly convey the concerns raised by the government of Sri Lanka to his government, and that it was his understanding that the warrant against former defence attaché in the United Kingdom, Brigadier Priyanka Fernando, will be withdrawn.
Well, President Maithripala Sirisena today met the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, and expressed views on the free trade agreement between the two nations. Expressing his concerns on the FTA, the President said that some amendments are required to fix several defects in the agreement caused from Sri Lanka's part during its preparation. In the meantime, President Sirisena also delivered the keynote address at the 3rd session of the UN Environments Forum of Ministers and Environmental Authorities of the Asia-Pacific region today.
The 3rd Forum of Ministers and Environment Authorities of Asia-Pacific commenced under the patronage of President Maithripala Sirisena at Marina Bay Sands Exhibition and Conference Centre in Singapore this morning. Heads of state and ministers representing around 40 countries were present at the forum, held under the title Innovative Solutions for Environmental Challenges and Sustainable Consumption and Production.
In this era in which the global community is trying to achieve sustainable development goals, I am privileged to deliver the keynote speech, Mr. President, Economic, Social and Environmental Sustainability of the World, particularly of our descendant from a proud agriculture civilization. It gives me an immense pleasure to share Sri Lanka experience with you for the betterment of the whole world. Human activities should not threaten to regeneration capacity of nature.
In the meantime, President Sirisena called on Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong this afternoon. During the meeting, the two leaders paid special attention to ameliorate the relations in trade, tourism and industries. President Sirisena also referred to the Singapore-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement and said that certain amendments will be done to it since there were issues from Sri Lanka's side when preparing the document.
Now, in the no matter what the subject of discussion these days is, it always circles back to one thing, the new constitution.
Right.
Well, that is exactly what happened in Parliament today as the former opposition leader and the leader of the Tamil National Alliance, R. Sampanthan, once more raised objections to former President Mahinda Rajapaksa being given the position of the leader of the opposition. In his statement, Sampanthan insisted that there is a clear contradiction or conflict of interest, especially since President Maithripala Sirisena is a member of the UPFA and also heads the cabinet while holding ministerial portfolios, with current opposition leader Rajapaksa also being a member of the UPFA.
Right. Now, after absorbing the objections raised by the leader of the TNA delivering his concluding remarks today, Speaker Karu Jayasuriya moved to say that there aren't enough provisions within the existing constitution to resolve the matter, despite him being compelled to recognize the UPFA as the legal opposition in Parliament. The Speaker then noted that a new constitution is the only way forward to resolve the confusion and anomalies surrounding the incumbent opposition leader.
You will thus observe that there is a clear and definite conflict of interest between the duties and functions performed by the President in the capacity referred to above and the duties and functions of Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa in his capacity as leader of the opposition. They both belong to the UPFA and its constituent party, the SLFP. In this context, may I refer to an article in the Sunday Island of January 6, 2019, wherein Mr. Nihal Jaivikrama, a legal luminary, states the following, and I quote, "Under the Constitution, the President is the head of the government. Of his own choice, Maithripala Sirisena is also the President of the SLFP and the UPFA, which is a coalition of like-minded political parties that includes the SLFP. Mahinda Rajapaksa, who claims to be the member of the SLFP, UPFA, is reportedly now the leader of the opposition. Therefore, Parliament is entitled to ask the President to explain how he can concurrently serve as head of government and head of the opposition, and whether he does not understand that functioning simultaneously in both capacities is a gross violation of the fundamental democratic basis of the Constitution." This statement of Dr. Nihal Jaivikrama is clearly indicative of the extent of the conflict of interest. The position would not arise if Honorable Rajapaksa was not leader of the opposition, which is the recognition accorded to him by you, Mr. Speaker.
You have the final say pertaining to this matter. You have delivered your final decision, and we cannot challenge it within or outside Parliament. There are elements that aren't clear. The President is the leader of the UPFA and the head of the government. Mahinda Rajapaksa, on the other side, is a member of the UPFA. The problem that lies before this Parliament is that whether the individuals of the same party can hold the positions of the head of state and the opposition leader. We have to avoid such situations when forming the new constitution. If not, the Parliament becomes a mockery.
It becomes a mockery.
In addition to the argument of you having the final say on this, I would like to remind the Leader of the House and R. Sambandhan that before and after the 19th Amendment, this government has given 3 similar examples. After the 19th Amendment, Nimal Siripal de Silva held the position of the opposition leader, whilst the leader of the UPFA, Maithripala Sirisena, was the head of state. Honourable R. Sambandhan and Minister Kiriyalla represented the Parliament in all 3 instances. I don't understand as to why they make such an issue out of this when they did not see it as problematic during those 3 instances.
As I indicate in my ruling on the 18th December 2018, after UPFA ceased to be a party, forming the national government and having officially decided to sit in the opposition, it was my duty to recognize UPFA as the party having the largest number of members sitting in the opposition. Having considered all aspects of the points of order raised by Honourable R. Sambandhan, I am of the view that this is a matter that needs to be addressed in drafting a new constitution, and we cannot find a remedy within the confines of the present constitution and the standing orders.
There was a mini victory for plantation workers today on their struggle to see the daily wage being increased to 1,000 rupees. During discussions with plantation owners, an accord has been agreed to raise the daily wage to 700 rupees. Minister of Plantation Industries Navid Dissanayake said both plantation owners association and trade union representatives agreed to the 200 rupee hike.
Plantation workers protested for 3 months, demanding that plantation owners increase the basic daily wage of workers to 1,000 rupees from 530 rupees. They also conducted several rounds of talks with relevant authorities in search of a solution. In such a backdrop, a discussion between Minister of Plantation Industries Navid Dissanayake and the Plantation Owners Association as well as trade unions was held at the Ministry of Labour today. During the meeting, all factions reached a common ground, agreeing on a basic daily wage of 700 rupees.
We had discussions with plantation companies and trade unions, and they agreed to increase the daily wage to 700 rupees. In addition, 50 rupees will be given as per share supplement. Altogether, 750 will be the definite amount that will be given to plantation workers. We expect to give plantation companies 100 million rupees from the Tea Board to pay wage arrears of workers for 3 months. Being able to increase the daily wage itself is a victory. In the history of plantations, this is the first time that a daily wage has been increased by 40%. 500 has been increased to 700, with 50 rupees as price share supplement makes it 750. They also receive EPF and ETF amounting to 105 rupees, which increases the sum to 855. There will also be 40 rupees per additional kilogram. According to my calculations, they can pluck 10 extra kilograms during the season, from which 400 rupees can be collected. It all amounts to a total of 1,255 rupees. We have given the best we could. We haven't signed the agreement yet, and it will be signed on Monday. If there is any faction which can get us a better deal, we will put off inking the agreement.
And we have more coming up next after this short commercial break. Do stay with us on First at 9.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is Other Derana 24.
Welcome back to your joining First at 9, and to discuss more on Sri Lanka's foreign policy going forward, I think we've invited to us respected diplomat of Sri Lanka, Dr. Palitha Kohona, the former ambassador and permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United States. Good evening, United Nations. Good evening and a warm welcome, Dr. Kohona, to our studios. I think we've been talking about the free trade agreement today, the Mali incident, and also the incident concerning Brigadier Priyanka Fernando in London. But I'd like to start off talking about the Sri Lanka's foreign policy, Dr. Kohona, and also the economic dialogue, diplomacy in terms of economic policy. Have we directed all this in the right direction to gain the maximum for Sri Lanka going forward, especially because the free trade agreement that we inked with Singapore is to be revisited now? The President has raised Sri Lanka's concerns with the Singaporean party.
Let me say this, free trade agreements or any trade agreements are not bad things per se, as long as they are properly negotiated with the country's national and essential interests at the center of our approach. We have heard many criticisms of the Singapore Free Trade Agreement. Some of them may be legitimate criticisms. As to whether we can now, having signed it, withdraw from it is another question. Once a country enters into an international agreement, it's honor bound to implement it, to give effect to its provisions. If we now say, okay, we made a mistake, can we pull back? The question is, where does that leave Sri Lanka's credibility? So the most important thing is, when we enter into any agreement, free trade or otherwise, we need to have the national interests uppermost. The negotiations must be based on protecting the national interest. I've done many free trade agreements, not only for this country, but others as well. The thing is, you need to have the national interest foremost, and to identify the national interest, there has to be a consultation process. Free trade agreements or investment protection agreements cannot be negotiated in secret or with the essentials hidden from the public. You need to get the stakeholders involved, get their views, and ensure that at least the most part of the stakeholder interest is protected in whatever agreement you enter into. Sometimes you can't achieve everything you want, but you can try to achieve the maximum. And that's very important in a trade agreement.
Dr. Kohona, let me direct your attention to the incidents that is happening in the UK with regard to Brigadier Priyanka. At this moment, a warrant has been issued. And how can the Sri Lankan government go ahead, go on about with this, in your point of view?
I think, well, let me start off by saying that what I have at my disposal is information which I have gathered from the print medium and also from the electronic medium. That is not the basis on which I can make a deep legal analysis. But there are a few points that we had to remember. Brigadier Fernando was representing Sri Lanka. He was a diplomatic agent, therefore he is entitled to diplomatic immunity. That's a fundamental principle in international relations. As to how he could have been charged in absentia and a warrant issued for his arrest is difficult for me to understand. First and foremost, I understand that the High Commission did alert the Foreign Office, but the Foreign Office may not have taken the appropriate action at the right time. It's normal diplomatic practice for a Foreign Office to intervene when a diplomat stationed in its territory is being arraigned before a court of law. The Foreign Office should have intervened and advised the judge, the magistrate in this case, that the individual concerned was protected under the Vienna Convention and he enjoyed diplomatic immunity. Of course, one consolation for Brigadier Fernando is that he's now in the company of the likes of Pinochet of Chile, Oscar Wilde, and others. They were all arraigned before the same tribunal, the same magistrate's court. James Joyce is another name that comes to mind. But I think first and foremost, the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, should have intervened to alert the judge that Brigadier Fernando was an internationally protected person. And Britain had a responsibility to take the step. And the other thing is very important to remember that if we do not protect diplomatic agents, then the entire framework of international relations breaks down. What will stop us from arresting a British diplomat in this country and sending him to jail, if not for the fundamental principles encapsulated in the Vienna Convention, which says that whatever happens, the diplomat has to be protected. You'll recall that there was a newspaper article this morning. You'll recall that Ambassador Boonwot, who was alleged to have murdered his wife, was not available to our judicial processes. He was taken back to Burma, Myanmar, for judicial processes to begin against him. That is the basis on which international relations are conducted. Does
this also mean that does this also point to a lack of foreign policy or relations from the Sri Lankan side in terms of dealing with these matters?
I hesitate to say that, but having been the head of that ministry once upon a time, it's very important that the foreign ministry take up issues of this nature immediately, not wait to react once something damaging has happened. You'll recall that in New York, my deputy, Brigadier Chavendra Silva, was charged before a Brooklyn court for alleged infractions of international humanitarian law during the war. We retained legal counsel. We also got the State Department to issue a statement to the judge concerned that the deputy ambassador was a protected person under the Vienna Convention. Our legal counsel, who prepared his brief in the mission, made necessary representations, and eventually the case was thrown out. And so, although there was much hullabaloo about the arraignment of then Brigadier Chavendra Silva, that case did not proceed any further because we took the necessary measures immediately without letting the domestic process run its course.
Right. I think there has also been a request very quickly, Dr. Kohona, that from the Foreign Minister to all diplomats, that they work towards raising the image of Sri Lanka to boost the image and to protect Sri Lanka's image. But then whatever damage that has been caused has been from policy directives from within the country. What should we do going forward, especially with the UNHRC issue still there, still unresolved?
I think there's a fundamental issue here. The Foreign Ministry must get its riding orders properly. They must be given direction, and the directions must be based on the national interest, not short-term convenience, but the national interest. A country's national interest is long-term. Sri Lanka needs to identify its national interest and in a bipartisan way advance that national interest. Sometimes, unfortunately, we tend to approach all issues, including foreign issues, in a very partisan way because of the nature of our politics. I personally think that certain issues are essential for the good of the country, the future of the country, and we need to identify these issues like most other countries, most mature countries in the world, and pursue them in a bipartisan manner.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kahuna, for your time here at our studios.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for our doctor. Let's move on with the other stories we have for you tonight. Chief Prelate of the Asgiri chapter, Most Venerable Warakagoda Sri Gnanaratana Thera, also touched on the proposed constitution today, saying that there is no necessity for a new document. The Most Venerable Thera's views were delivered when members of the Sri Lanka Global Forum called on the Chief Prelate this morning.
Members of the Sri Lanka Global Forum called on Chief Prelate of the Asgiri chapter, Most Venerable Warakagoda Sri Gnanaratana Thera this morning.
There is no need for a new constitution. There is no use of giving prominence to a constitution now. What should be done is to work. We're not able to build a temple or place a statue in certain parts of the country. They can do anything in those parts. Recently, they tried to make us angry by destroying statues of Lord Buddha with extremist plans. They were ready with weapons hidden away, thinking we would react. These extremists wanted to shed blood in our country. Even the recently appointed governor of the northern province said temples can't be renovated in that area. If our chief prelates and monks can't go to the north to renovate our ancient places of worship, we can't be satisfied with the religious reconciliation and peace.
Members of the Sri Lanka Global Forum then met Anunayaka of the Malwatta chapter, Most Venerable Dimul Kumbure Vimaladharma Thera.
Now they're talking about a new constitution. They should be careful when doing this. It's good if they can expedite it because you can't be late in doing such things. However, we have doubts because the ones who create the constitution are partial.
On to business news. The all-share price index ended 0.3% firmer at 5,978.30 today, with a turnover of 460.8 million rupees, which is less than last year's daily average of 834 million rupees. Foreign investors, in the meantime, were net sellers for the first time in 4 sessions, and they sold a net 22.9 million rupees worth of shares. There have been net sellers of 2.07 billion rupees worth of stocks so far this year. Here's a look at a brief report on today's market performance.
During the week, the ASPI lost 0.2%. Meanwhile, the S&P SL20 decreased by 0.7%. The average daily turnover for the week was down from last week to nearly 478 million rupees. Furthermore, foreigners remained active for the week, closing as net buyers, where foreign purchasers accounted for 60% of the total weekly turnover. Out of the weekly turnover, crossings accounted for nearly 25%, which was a lower proportion than last week.
Sri Lanka's rupee closed steady today as dollar selling by exporters offset importer demand for the greenback. The currency ended at 183 rupees and 57 cents against the US dollar. The rupee has appreciated 0.55% so far this year, and investors have been waiting for some cues over the government's borrowing and repayment of foreign loans. The rupee fell 16% in 2018 and was one of the worst performing currencies in Asia due to heavy foreign outflows.
We'll be back with the international news after the short break. Just stay with us.
You are watching Sri Lanka's #1 news channel. This is Other Derana 24.
With the United Kingdom in the deepest political crisis in half a century as it grapples with how or even whether to exit the European Union it joined in 1973. The country's symbolic head of state, Queen Elizabeth II, has urged people to find common ground and to respect different points of view. Her remarks are seen as referring to the Brexit debate, with MPs due to vote on the Premier's deal for leaving the EU again next week. MPs rejected the deal last week, but the UK will leave on the 29th of March with no deal unless they can agree on a way forward.
Queen Elizabeth has sent a delicately coded message to Britain's factious political class over Brexit, urging lawmakers to seek common ground and grasp the big picture to resolve the crisis. While the 92-year-old Queen did not mention Brexit explicitly in an annual speech to her local Women's Institute in Norfolk yesterday, the monarch said every generation faced fresh challenges and opportunities. In an off-camera speech, she said that when looking for answers in the modern age, she would prefer the tried and tested recipes like speaking well of each other and respecting different points of view, coming together to seek out the common ground and never losing sight of the bigger picture. Meanwhile, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte told reporters in Davos yesterday that the European Union will not change its mind on Brexit and the only feasible deal is already on the table.
Yes, the UK has now come up with a position and the backstop is not there because we want it. Nobody wants to trigger it. It's only there because of all the red lines. No customs union, no free movement of people, no hard border in the Irish Sea. And collectively we have said we don't want a hard border in Ireland. So both the UK and the EU. And that means the present deal on the table is the only deal feasible.
But the British say this is what Europe always says. It says no, 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 and then it changes its mind at the last minute.
But let's assume we change our mind. We won't, but let's assume. That would mean that you would give a time limit to the backstop, or you would give the UK a unilateral button to stop the backstop.
Well, that's all from us for the week. First at 9, we'll return tomorrow at the same time with our weekend edition. And if you did miss any of our stories tonight, do log on to www.otherderana.lk or follow us on our social media sites. I'm Derana.
And I'm Mahesh Johnny. Enjoy the weekend. Good night.